Dr. Corey Miller is the president and CEO of Ratio Christi, an international campus ministry focusing on Christian apologetics and evangelism. Corey grew up in Utah as a seventh-generation Latter-day Saint before coming to Christ in 1988. He has served on pastoral staff at 4 churches and taught nearly 100 college courses in philosophy, theology, rhetoric, and comparative religions in notable institutions such as Purdue and Indiana Universities. He has written or co-authored 2 books on philosophy and 3 books on Mormonism. His 6th book, The Progressive Miseducation of America, Confronting the Cultural Revolution from the Classroom to Your Community, will be published October 14, 2025. He holds master's degrees in philosophy, biblical studies, and philosophy of religion and ethics. His PhD is in philosophical theology from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He is passionate about defending the truth of the gospel in winsome and bold ways. Please welcome Dr. Corey Miller.
Good to be sharing this evening with you fine folks. Of course, you're familiar with the passage in the book of Acts with Eutychus, right? Paul spoke so long that he fell out the window and died. So my good friend Don puts me at the end of the night after we've eaten all the fine food. I expect there to be a medical doctor being used tonight. All right. Well, yes, background, I've written a half a dozen books now. The first 3 on the left are with respect to Mormonism, with my background being a 7th gen, and going back to my ancestor being one of Joseph Smith's bodyguards, and to prove it, my family says I come from healthy stock. And that means that he took 5 wives and 36 children later, of which I'm a descendant. I wanted to contribute to that past endeavor to make a contribution, a splash in that area. The other 2 books I've written are on philosophy and comparative religions with half a dozen atheists, half a dozen Christians, and then on historical figures in philosophy like Aristotle, Maimonides, and Aquinas. My recent book, though, is my most important book ever. It's not out yet. It's on Amazon for pre-order, but it will be out October 15th, and I've already begun interviews about it. I really want to get the word out about this. I've been working on this for a couple of years, and that's part of the discussion tonight on the third revolution and the scandal of the evangelical mind. And sorry, I'm like I need a cowboy hat. Where's my Texan? I'm going to be a double shooter up here tonight because there's a mix-up between what you're seeing and what I'm seeing. The third revolution and the scandal of the evangelical mind. The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind was a book written by Mark Knowles, a historian, about 30 years ago, almost this month. He was a professor at Wheaton College, and then he went to Notre Dame, where he retired. And on the first page, you find out rather quickly what it's about. The scandal of the evangelical mind is that there isn't much of an evangelical mind, which is really sad. It corresponds to what Bertrand Russell, the atheist, once said, that most Christians would rather die than think. In fact, they do. It's a scandal because we are not a faith tradition. The conference theme, will he find faith? We are not a faith tradition. We are a knowledge tradition. When I came out of Mormonism, I believed in something back then that was more blind faith. And I had to know that something else was true. I had an encounter, an experience, but how did I know that the Bible was God's word? Because I'd been taught my whole life that we believed the Bible as far as it's translated correctly, which implied that it's not. But it didn't matter because you had living apostles and prophets downtown in Salt Lake. Now that I no longer believe in that, and I've had this Christian conversion experience, and I'm starting to think critically now for the first time, and I kid you not about this, I literally have the receipts for this. I had a 0.666 on my GPA. I was never an intellectual. When I was finally faced with my Mormon family having to reconsider this conversion experience that I had had and reread the Book of Mormon again for the sake of truth and not tradition, I did, And I found severe problems, but it really made me start wondering whether or not the Bible was God's word, whether it was even historically reliable, whether God exists, and if so, which God? And so that sent me into a small period of skepticism and looking at comparative religions and philosophy, which I have ended up teaching for a dozen years at Indiana University eventually. I ran into the field of apologetics. It blew my mind. And for the first 10 years, I went through Bible college and seminary. I was a pastor at a couple of different churches. But my heart of hearts was evangelism. And God had given me a heart for evangelism and a strategic mind. And I kept seeing the university. And I thought maybe one day. I thought about the story of the Greeks and the Trojan War and how they tried to broach those walls for 10 years. Unsuccessfully. And finally, they figured out a stealth plan to get in from the inside out through the Trojan horse. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I switched from biblical studies to philosophy of religion, did another master's degree, got in ministry again, came back into pastoral ministry for a time, but I was getting claustrophobia. I needed to get to the university. And so I pitched my tent out there to Purdue University, and that took me out to the Midwest in 2004. So for the next 15 years, it was all about philosophy of religion, arguments for and against God's existence. Over the last 5 or 10 years, though, it's shifted once again, now into social political philosophy, in part because of my role as president of Ratio Christi, all the legal fights we are constantly involved in. I suspect this month, when we are back on our campuses, I will have no less than a dozen legal inquiries going on at one time. That's what happened last year, as an example. I'm flying at 30,000 feet. I'm looking at the whole culture. I'm seeing what's happening at the universities. I'm not just a person who's been a professor for a dozen years at a university. I look at the universities as a whole. I'm a student of the universities, the history of the universities, and the universities as they are now. And I wrote a book to tell people what is going on. What is happening out there right now? What has happened to my country? Perhaps you've read the book, The Lord of the Rings. You've watched the movie trilogy. And if you remember in the beginning of the episode of the Fellowship of the Ring, the elven princess said, she whispered, "The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I see it. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it." There was a time when America was great, when America was good. And de Tocqueville noticed that when he came over and examined the country and said that if America ever loses its goodness, she will lose her greatness. And he was right. A lot has happened in the last 25 years, the last quarter of a century, this first part of the new millennium. This is no longer Grandma's America. You feel it, I feel it, everybody feels it. Everybody feels it. The Democrat-Republican thing is not even the same anymore. You've got two Democratic recent presidential candidates, one a Kennedy, who's now serving, both of them, on the Republican staff. What is going on there? You have Bruce Jenner, i.e. Caitlyn Jenner, who ran in the last 5 years for governor of California, well, of course, as a Republican, backed by the RNC. You have at the last RNC conference, the primetime 7 o'clock hour, an OnlyFans person up there saying, MAGA is my people. You've got a transhumanist who has done his part to repopulate the earth with 12 or 13 illegitimate children, who saved free speech by buying Twitter. And he was a lifelong Democrat who went all in and sacrificed his potential wealth by becoming Republican. What in the world is going on? What a strange time. What a strange time when you get a nominee for the Supreme Court that can't answer the question that my 4-year-old should be able to answer, what is a woman? And worse yet, that she gets confirmed by enough senators to be a lifetime appointed judge. What in the world is going on? And it's not just transgenderism, I think I'm a woman, therefore I am a woman. It's transageism. These are real cases of dysphoria, real cases. People who self-identify as a different age and try to apply for legal status at that age. It's not just that, it's transracialism. I am a person who is black trapped in a white person's body. It's, it's not only that, it's transableism. Numerous people have self-identified as blind, and they find a good psychologist who will help coax them into taking liquid Drano and blinding themselves. These are real cases. This is not just theory, because they self-identify as blind. You have people that self-identify as being single or no-limbed, and you'll find a surgeon ready to make a buck who has literally already done this, amputated arms and legs to help the person who needs the help. That's not really help. This is what's going on. You get the rise of the nuns. You get the fading away of Christianity. In the last 5 years, if you've not been at a university campus, you would not recognize it. It is not the same. Even if you were a professor there 15 years ago, it is not the same anymore. We can all remember, many in this room, I can see by the ages, we probably remember where we were in 9/11. All three of my kids will never have known a world that was not post 9/11. They were born in this millennium. Few now live who remember what America was. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it. 9/11 hits, buildings explode, people die. What in the world was that? Islam. What's Islam? Nobody knew. And then soon after that, a group arose to power called the neo-atheists, who exploited that situation to say, look, in the name of God, what happened? In the name of religion. And the Christians quickly pushed back and tried to compare Muhammad and Jesus. And the clever atheist said, wait a minute, Jesus was Jewish. Did he believe in the Old Testament? That God of the Old Testament is every bit as bad as the jihadists' deity. And that's where they took this, the rise of the new atheists, which has now since virtually died, and Islamism. And then race. I stood at this lectern 4 years ago, and I was lecturing around the country at that time because we were one of the first ministries in the country to put out anything in literature on critical race theory. And I asked this audience, I remember this, how many of you want to be racist? Raise your hand. And it's a good thing. Nobody did. But then I said, how many of you want to be anti-racist? Raise your hand. Half of this audience raised their hands. And now we found out what that means, what we signed up for, right? Our country has been revolutionized. It's been ravished by this. A couple of years ago, you had what was called the grievance studies. 3 atheists got together. They were concerned about what was going on in, say, the humanities departments and social sciences. And they set out to write about 21 peer-reviewed journal articles, which at least a third got accepted for publication. Another third were under review before they had the whistle blown. And these things were crazy. One title was The Conceptual Penis. Another one looked at, it was Hitler's Mein Kampf, a portion of it, but they took out certain words and overlaid it with feminist, social justice, critical theoretical words, and it got published. Another one talked about rape and dog parks in Portland, Oregon, where they examined thousands of testicles of male dogs. It received an award. This was craziness. You could put forth anything you want. They made it all up. And finally, someone at the Wall Street Journal blew the whistle on it, and now it was on. Now people on the uber left in those kinds of settings were going after a guy who basically had become my friend. And here he is. This is Peter Boghossian. Peter Boghossian wrote the book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. He was my arch enemy, metaphysically speaking. He had a great YouTube following on street epistemology, treating people of faith like psychiatric parents. Will there be faith? What is faith? Faith is blind. That's what he says. And you're supposed to not berate, even though Richard Dawkins endorsed the book and it was forwarded by Michael Shermer. He was arguing that we shouldn't be like the rest of the new atheists, even though he was a new atheist. We shouldn't berate Christians. We should treat them compassionately, with sympathy. We should treat them like patients in an insane asylum that are shooting air balls, that are praying, and it's not even hitting the hoop. In fact, there's no hoop. And through Socratic good ways of asking questions, he thought this would lead them through reason to science and eventually to atheism. Boghossian and I were tracking some of the same game at the time. And we had a mutual friend introduce us, and he invited me to his atheism seminar, 300-level class at Portland State University, and invited me to give arguments, the best arguments I could think of for God's existence. And so I did. And then he had his students during Q&A trained to try to take me down, which they tried. And then we went to lunch after, and he spoke up and said, "We need an alliance." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We," and by we, I mean Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Michael Shermer, the gang, "we need you and you need us. In fact, you guys are already outside of the university. No one wants to hear about talking snakes anymore. Give up this business of apologetics. I'll come and talk with your board. This is about civilization now. I'm done with the atheism, theism debates. This is about civilization. I'm dedicating the rest of my career to defeating social justice and critical theory." Whoa. So I said, I'm intrigued by what you're saying. Remember, you guys, your side is the one who started this. You're the one who tried to burn the ground. And now look, now you've got this Frankenstein that's emerged, and you can't control it, and you want to be friends. Okay, we'll have a limited alliance. We'll get together. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That was back in 2019. No, that's before George Floyd died. That's before COVID hit. That's before anyone knew what this new racism was. It's like when 9/11 hit and no one knew what Islam was. We already had literature out on this thing. I was already at Purdue studying under Marxist professors there, explicit Marxist professors. And in my class were peers that one got kicked out of the program for burglary. Another one, I've since had a Texas congressman contact me to do a character assessment because he doxed a police chief's wife. He's written 4 books on anarchy, and he's an Antifa professor. He's tenured in Texas. These were my classmates. I saw what was coming. I could smell this stuff. I'd studied liberation theology in seminary during biblical studies. Now I'm studying hardcore Marxism by Marxist professors and all my peers. I'm seeing what's coming in the future. Boghossian and I met in 2019. We went on the road, went on tour together at various universities, lecturing as a liberal atheist and a conservative Christian as allies. A Christian and an atheist unite against the death of intellectual diversity at the university. We took 4 campuses in Utah. We were getting pushback, cancellations, being called logical fascists, trying to oppress people with our logic, and even one well-known campus ministry who was supposed to show up boycotted us and instead had his staff watch a video at the same time on white guilt. And so that led to my conversation with the Cru president after that, because I used to be Cru staff as well. Boghossian has since had some change of hearts. When we were out on a lecture tour together, he would talk about how some of his best friends are evangelical Christians. They help his kids. They don't dox him. They don't mock his wife. They don't call him a pedophile. They help his son get a job. And he said that wherever I go and speak on Ratio Christi campuses, those people make me think. He writes an article. Sorry, that was the last one. He wrote that article in at theamericanmind.org. Welcome to Culture War 2.0, the Great Realignment, Alliances, where he's saying it's a really weird time to be alive, when liberal atheists, conservative Christians can get together, both still believe in science, both still believe in the correspondence theory of truth, both still believe in Voltaire's dictum, I may disagree with what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it. Both are liberal because they're conservative, right? Russell Kirk's book, if you've read that. Liberal in the classical sense. But someone else is now in the room that's illiberal. That is Marxist, you might say. That is the heart of cancel culture. Stalin was alleged to have said something like this: ideas are more powerful than weapons. We don't allow our enemies to have weapons, so why should we let them have ideas? That's not liberal. Something else is going on here. We are in a cultural revolution. James Lindsay voted for Trump in 2020. He was one of his co-belligerents in those grievance studies. I teased Peter and asked him, "Are you going to vote for Trump?" He never responded. But then, close to this election, second term, he tweeted this: so many centrists and liberals have whispered the unthinkable to me. They'll be voting for Trump. How in the world did that happen? What is going on? This is no longer Grandma's America. We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. He's realized there's a bigger enemy in the field. And alliances are important. In the 40s, FDR and Churchill looked over at Stalin and said, "We need you, you need us. We're going to sleep with both our eyes open watching you, though, and we'll have to deal with you later. But for now, there's someone else worse in the room." We are in a cultural revolution in this country. What is culture? It's defined by the norms, values, practices, customs, beliefs, language, laws, and shared meanings. Not all revolutions are tanks and guns. I've studied all the major revolutions. I did so in effort to write this book to try to figure out what kind we were in. It's not a frontal assault. It's not like a Russian revolution. It's not like a Chinese Maoist revolution. It's a westernized revolution without having to fire a gun. It's not necessarily a bloodless revolution like the English Revolution was. It's not the American Revolution. It does have more proximity with the French Revolution, but not until someone gets in power. Looking back over the last 25 or so years, we can see how things changed. They took a poll back in 1998 asking Americans, what do you think about patriotism? Is patriotism very important to you? I don't know about you, but when is the last time you sang that song, Proud to Be an American, and you reflected and thought, I don't know, what is everybody else thinking? And you're looking around and you're wondering what their eyes are doing, and they're looking at you, and you know something is odd here. Half the country thinks America is evil. The other half hate what America has become. And it makes it hard to sing songs like that at the baseball game or the concert. Back then, it was 70%. 25 years later, it's almost half in 2023. Proud to be an American. Those that say religion is very important, 62% in 98. 40% now. 39% is actually the exact number of people who go to church almost weekly, by the way. I just noticed that for the first time as I'm looking at that. Those who say raising children is very important. Well, that should be high. Those marks should be high. 59% 25 years ago. Half of that now, 30%. This revolution is impacting the entire West. And there are a lot of issues that come to bear on that, from careerism to feminism to anti-family or a new kind of family. And the last living virtue, perhaps, owned by liberals, typically, tolerance. Tolerance. 80%, 5 years later, down to 58%. I taught at Indiana University for 12 years, and one time I had this former pastor who turned gay who charged me with creating a suicidal environment. And it was because even though I assign all and only atheistic or agnostic textbooks, and trust me, my atheist counterparts don't do the same courtesy by offering Christian textbooks. I felt like I needed to do that. And so the author is anti-Bible, pro-gay, typically left in some way, shape, or form. And when I had an opportunity to give a biomedical argument from harm, a natural law argument that's there in the literature to educate rather than to indoctrinate and show both sides, I was charged with creating a suicidal environment. They were going to get rid of me. 2 of my atheist students got my defense. They took the flash drive that they record all my lectures on. They went to the administration and said, if you punish him without even listening to his lectures, even though we disagree with his view on God and sexuality, he did nothing wrong. And if you punish him without even listening to the lectures, we are leaving this university because it's not a free-thinking university. Brethren, I'm on trial for the resurrection. I think I've heard that somewhere before. I was exonerated with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom. A couple of years ago, David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons, Barna-type people, wrote a book, Good Faith, Being a Christian When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme. Turns out 44% of the people at that time believed that people of faith are part of the problem and could hardly be part of the solution. 20% trust the clergy. These guys used to be the smartest cats in the alley. I write about this in my book. Almost every college president for about 200 years was also a member of the clergy and gave the capstone class on moral philosophy to the seniors. Today, the average pastor may as well be viewed as a smiling greeter at Walmart, according to some statistics. It is not good. The perception of the pastorate is not good. And I'm not here to throw every pastor under the bus. I'm saying this is public perception. These are the stats. Public perception has shifted from thoughtful pastors with a smart mind and a good heart to empty-minded, to irrelevant, and pedophile priests. 40% of American adults think proselytizing, sharing your faith, is extreme. But when Christians do it, it's 60%. The good news, I guess, is half of America thinks that the church is still relevant when we focus on food pantries and keeping the kids off streets. But the moment you tell them why, what motivates you to do the food pantries and keep kids off streets, now you're an extremist. Shut your mouth, Open your wallet, give us your children. Another recent set of polls coming out of Arizona Christian University, again related to Barna Group, the American Worldview Inventory. It wanted to know how many people in America hold a biblical worldview. Well, what is a biblical worldview? That's a good start. It's characterized by these 7 items. See what you think. A belief in God's existence and understanding of his nature. All humans are sinners in need of a Savior. Jesus is the only way. The Bible is God's word and is historically reliable and true in all it teaches. Absolute truth exists and is grounded in God. The purpose of life is to know, love, and serve God, and success is understood through faithful obedience to God. We should expect high marks, high marks. 6% of Americans in 2022 hold that biblical worldview characterization. A year later, it was 4%. But the good news is the pastors, 37%. But the evangelical, non-denominational pastors, now it's party time, just over half. Do you see the problem now? We are in a really bad situation. The scandal of the evangelical mind has not improved much. Well, what about the universities? University professors notoriously lean left. How left? In the mid-1990s, it was roughly 2.3 to 1. It was still severe, but there's still checks and balances there. It's not an echo chamber. There's accountability. By 2020, it's 12 to 1 for those ages 60 and over who are retiring. 23 to 1 for those who just got tenure and are around the age 40 and have about 20 to 30 years ahead of them. In New England, where everybody wants to go, that's the Ivy Leagues to get the best jobs, 27 to 1. So in a room of 100 professors, you're only going to get maybe 3 conservatives. Doesn't mean they're a Christian. And one of them gets shot when he puts his head above the foxhole, and the other 2 learn their lesson. Religious studies is the worst. It's 70 to 1. In 2023, political donations by Yale faculty went to Democrats at almost 99%. Michael Bloomberg spoke at Harvard's commencement address a couple cycles ago. It was 95% then. He is speaking to the Harvard graduates, and he says, Harvard is a good school, but it's not a great school. It's good because it's got diversity of this, and that. But when 95% of Harvard's faculty give campaign contributions to Obama, something tells me there is no viewpoint diversity at this school. Yale, just last month, statistics in their social sciences and humanities, 78 to 1. That is an ideological monolith. These are echo chambers. You can imagine how bad it is there. And how bad is it then for the students who aren't getting it in their churches, and they go off to the secular baptismal font, and they get lost by 50 to 80%. That's why we emerged as Ratio Christi. A couple years earlier, just to give you an idea of what's going on with the student body, a 2017 national survey of students by Yale University revealed that almost half of students support campus speech codes. We've argued this one in federal court. We have a federal win out of it. In fact, I didn't tell you this, but we've got 4 federal victories, 5 appellate court victories, 2 SCOTUS assists, and in December, we gave Biden a going away home present after 4-year litigation with the Department of Education. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's just to keep the lights on. Thou shalt not violate this lexicon of words. 81% say that words are a form of violence. That's why you can't say these words. And it's so serious, according to the student body, that 1/3 of them believe that physical violence is justified to prevent hate speech. Well, gosh, I'm glad not a lot of people do hate speech. Well, wait, what's hate speech? 2/3 of them define it as anything a student believes to be considered hurtful to a particular person. Now you can see the radicals in the student body and what's going on there. The anti-Semitism, the cancel culture, the fear and trembling that they put the professors in. Do you remember Evergreen College, where the president of the university, they took it over and they wouldn't even let him go to the bathroom until he got on his knees? What in the world is going on? This is not Grandma's America. We are in a cultural revolution. But there are bright spots. Bright spots perhaps because it's gotten so bad. You get the agnostic Christian. Is that a thing? Tom Holland, in his book, Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World, he said that every human being possessed an equal dignity was not remotely self-evident truth. The Romans would have laughed at it. The origins of this principle of equal dignity, as Nietzsche had so contemptuously pointed out, lay not in the French Revolution, nor in the Declaration of Independence, nor in the Enlightenment, but in the Bible. He writes in another article, Why I Was Wrong About Christianity. The founding conviction of the Enlightenment, that it owed nothing to the faith into which its greatest figures had been born, increasingly came to seem to me unsustainable. Even as belief in God fades across the West, will there be faith? The countries that were once collectively known as Christendom continue to bear the stamp of the 2 millennia-old revolution that Christianity represents. It is why we generally assume that every human life is of equal value. In my morals and ethics, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian. An agnostic Christian. I'll say that again. Does that make sense? How about this one by Richard Dawkins? Whether irrational or not in his latest book, it does, unfortunately, he's mad about this, seem plausible that if somebody sincerely believes God is watching his every move, he might be more likely to be good. I am a cultural Christian, Dawkins now says, right? When it comes to Islamism or Marxism, I'm on Team Christian every day. I love cultural Christianity. I love the cathedrals. Dawkins thinks that he can just go to the supermarket and buy these beautiful apples forever. He doesn't realize those apples come from a tree, not from the supermarket. I am a cultural Christian. Elon Musk calls himself a cultural Christian. Jordan Peterson calls himself an existentialist Christian. Who knew that the pejorative term cultural Christian, which we meant not a real Christian yesterday, now means something cool? I am a cultural Christian. Why? Because I don't want that crap over there that's been trying to revolutionize our country. That explains the craziness at the political level, which deeper still is conservative and liberal, and deeper still is secular and religious. And it's not just politics. Look, politics is downstream from ethics. From culture. Culture is downstream from education, and the apex of education, the university. The university. And so Peter Boghossian once told me, to paraphrase, I forget the exact terms, he said, I told Richard that if he's not careful, he's only going to be allowed to speak on Ratio Christi campuses. Because we have those discussions. Here's another quote by Richard Dawkins that got his Humanist of the Year award taken away from him after 25 years. He tweeted, Rachel Dolezal, a white chapter president of NAACP up in this area, was vilified for identifying as black. She went to an all-black college, by the way, sued them because they weren't going to let her, and graduated. Some men choose to identify as women, and some women choose to identify as men. You will be vilified if you deny that they literally are what they identify as. Discuss. The woke mob came after him, and he quickly went on the apology tour and blamed the Republicans for what he had just said. Sorry, Richard, it's not going to help. They're not going to forgive. There is no forgiveness. You are a white, old, male, probably have some capital, heterosexual. You've got some bad things going for you under the new revolutionary regime. Nietzsche said, a madman who arose early in the morning with lantern in hand, shouting, "Where is God?" But because no one in the town square believed, they laughed and jeered. Is God lost? Is he hiding? Then one said, "We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. Is there any up or down left? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? God is dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, comfort ourselves?" In The Madman. Nietzsche didn't believe that God literally died. The God is dead mantra that was on Time magazine's front cover in the 50s or 60s comes from Nietzsche here. And it's the idea that if the idea of God is gone, what are we going to do? How do we support something like the sanctity of human life that has implications for war, for police, for poverty, for beginning, end-of-life issues, virtually everything? So Peter Singer, a Jewish atheist, Marxist at Princeton, writes the book, The Unsanctifying of Human Life. You cannot have the sanctity of human life if you do not have a sanctifier of human life. That's the consequence. Black lives don't matter, white lives don't matter, striped and polka dot lives don't matter. No lives matter on the Serengeti, except for the will to power. The strong survive. It's a brave new world out there. What explains this massive cultural shift? What is the number one institution upstream shaping culture downstream? A lot of faithful Christians want to say it's the church, the church, the church. That just simply is not the truth. The church is being influenced, not influencing. In fact, that statistic I gave earlier, those who go to church weekly in America is 30%. If you want to add 9%, that's almost weekly. If you go to church weekly, you get 52 sermons a year. But at ages of 18 to 24, 39% are enrolled in college. And this month, August, they go back to school. And in 1 month on the university campus, they get 60 sermons in the first month alone. Who has the ear of the young people? Why is it that the number was in the 30 percentile of Gen Z who had more sympathy for the shooter of the CEO of United Healthcare than the victim? Why do we embrace today a culture of assassination? This is no longer Grandma's America. This is what's influencing everything upstream. The university. In my book, it's like 3 books. What Happened to America? Look no further than the universities. And what are we going to do about it? It may be the case that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Maybe not. But it is never the case that what happens in the universities stays in the universities. As go the universities, so goes the culture. As goes the U.S. university, so goes the world. 1 in 3 world leaders, prime ministers, presidents, dictators, you name it, 1 in 3 get an academic degree from a U.S. university. What happens here changes the world. And so we go back, and I give the whole history of the university. I've been to all of the colonial colleges. And despite their websites washing their history, I have pictures, I have the receipts to show it. It's etched into their buildings everywhere. Harvard was founded in 1636 by who? The Puritans, the Pilgrims. And its motto for nearly 300 years was truth for Christ and the church until 1936. They began to wane. Some of their faithful went down the road, and some businessmen to start Yale. Lux et veritas, light and truth, where light symbolizes in Scripture salvation and God's presence. And then their child prodigy, Jonathan Edwards, goes down the road and becomes president of Princeton. And Princeton's motto, likewise, under God she flourishes. And then a few years later, Columbia University, and all of the colonial schools before 1776. From 1636 Harvard until 1840, as I said, almost every college president was a member of the clergy. Until 1880, church and chapel attendance were still required. What happened? What happened? Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we listen more. Let us listen now. Let us whisper." What happened? How did we lose the universities? Because in that there is a clue on how to reclaim them. I want to talk about 3 revolutions, and I'm not talking about the ones earlier. I'm talking about ideological revolutions. From 1880 to 1930, our people were shipped overseas. We had very few, if any, graduate schools in the United States. We sent them over to Europe, mostly to Germany. And someone has asked, just like the question, has anything good come from Galilee? Has anything good come from Germany since the Reformation? And if you're Catholic, not even then. Germany, you have the ending of the Enlightenment with Immanuel Kant, that you remember, you can't know ultimate reality, right? The father of agnosticism. From that, you get Schleiermacher, the father of modern liberal theology. You get Hegel. You get Feuerbach, who influenced Freud and Marx. You get Freud and you get Marx. You get Heidegger and all the biblical higher criticism and everything else. You get Nietzsche and Freudian sexuality. All that stuff got shipped over to the new students with higher degrees, and the battle was on for 50 years. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Columbia. And then we had to go start Wheaton and Calvin and Biola, which are now seeing cracks in their fissures as well, but because of revolution number 2. Scientific naturalism was the first ideological revolution. We could detect its presence when disciplines started changing their names. From politics, which was always a branch of ethics, to now political science. From psychology, the psycheology, the study of the soul, to the study of the brain and the central nervous system, the Department of Psychological Sciences, as it's called at Purdue. Science was the be-all, end-all of knowledge now. Anything that you couldn't taste, touch, hear, smell, feel, cast it in the flames, David Hume said, who died in 1776. And it impacted the church by giving us liberal Protestant theology and the social gospel. Well, right in the 1930s, something else was happening when the dust was settling in America. Over in Germany again, there was this little school called the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. We now know it as critical race theory, critical queer theory, critical gender theory, critical pedagogy, critical climate theory, critical everything. If it's not critical thinking, it's Marx plus X, Y, or Z. And most of the founders of that school were Jewish, atheist, and they weren't national socialists, they were globalist socialists. They were Antifa, anti-fascists. That's what Antifa is, you know that, right? They're Marxists. And Stalin and Hitler were never great buddies, were they? When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, it's a bad place to be if you're Jewish and a globalist socialist. The National Socialists won. They had to get out of town. Where did they go? Columbia University, Brandeis University, UCLA. And down south in the Axis powers of Marxism was perhaps the most dangerous cultural Marxist ever, Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci never got out of prison. We're going to go visit his grave in April, by the way. Anyone want to come with? He was imprisoned, but his writings got translated into the English-speaking world right in Indiana, right south from here in North Bend at Notre Dame by a Marxist professor by the name of Joseph Buttigieg, father of Mayor Pete, critical queer theory. And within 15 years, French postmodernism began. That's where postmodernism came from. And you get guys like Foucault, the most cited scholar in human history without doubt, who had sex with international foreign students. He would rape them on the tombstones of the cemetery and throw money at them. He died of AIDS. He taught in the American universities. Derrida, we hear about deconstructionism, deconstructing the faith, all these worship bands in Nashville. Derrida. We hear about Rorty, he was American. Lyotard, who coined the term, the postmodern term. And you would think in postmodernism, because it's relativistic, when it comes to politics, they would be uber left and uber right, all across the spectrum. They're not. Every single one of them, to the man, for the first and second generation, were all hard leftist. Technical title, the New Left. They were all members or sympathizers with the French Communist Party. So you've got now revolution number 2, and they all came over to America and donned our brightest universities in the social sciences and the humanities this time. So you have revolution number 2, an amalgam now of postmodern cultural Marxism. And in the 60s, they tried, they didn't win. You see the difference now between critical race theory and Martin Luther King, who said, think about my character, not about my skin color. And these guys now are oppressed with racism. Marx was too, as much as Hitler was. They are not MLK. They're Marxists. That's the revolution we've been experiencing. These postmodern cultural Marxists have made it through, and in the 70s, and you've got people up here at Northwestern and University of Chicago, 2 weather underground bombers of police stations and so forth. These people in the 70s realized America doesn't like all this violence. And so they recalibrated and they talked about the long march through the institutions. See, the difference between classical Marxism, which was focused on economics, the haves and the have-nots, is that Gramsci and the critical theory school realized that unlike the East in Russia and China, you can't do a frontal assault in a revolution in the West. And it's because there's this, it's like this castle and moat that whenever you lob shells, it's like it self-regenerates like a living cell. And so what you have to do is go after the soft tissue of culture, i.e. cultural Marxism, and you have to ensconce yourselves and infiltrate into the soft tissue of culture, beginning with academia, media, and here it goes, you ready? Ecclesia, church. They have infiltrated the churches, the campus ministries, the Christian academic societies, and our second entrenched Christian schools. You can't escape this stuff. You have to prepare for it. So what's the third revolution then? Here it goes. Commercial break. Wait for it. Barna again, Reviving Evangelism, fairly recent book. He asked the question to non-believers, what most increases interest in Christianity to you? The answer, better evidence to support it. 44% of them overwhelmingly chose that out of 13 possible answers. Almost half. And yet this answer, this option, when they asked not just the professing Christians, but the practicing Christians, what they thought that non-believers would say, that one was picked dead last, which is to say that the church is out of touch with where the non-believing world is at. They want answers. But here we go, our own sociologists. There is evidence and data, but then there's explanation and interpretation. Barna concludes, non-Christians want credible, reasonable explanations of the Christian faith. They unfortunately misinterpret the data because of a misunderstanding of what apologetics is. They say, this does not necessarily mean Christians should invest heavily in traditional apologetics, however, as demonstrated by non-Christians' distaste for street preaching and tracts. Depersonalized outreach that feels intrusive or manipulative is likely to lower openness to the gospel. Great. So Barna can't even encourage us to obey the Bible, where 1 Peter 3:15 and 16 says, be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that's in you, and do it with gentleness and respect. We find the head, the heart, and the hands of Christ. Barna still wants us to be in the scandal of the evangelical mind, the mindless menace of Christianity. Maybe follow Jesus, who says, love God with your mind. You want to be like Jesus? Follow Jesus, who said that the purpose to life is knowledge of God, John 17:3. It is, you do not get a badge in heaven for being anti-intellectual and dumb. You don't have to be a Mr. Spock on Star Trek, but you have to at least be intelligible, which means read, think, use your mind, because lives depend on it. And so the third revolution that I'm calling for in this book is us, now. We must give an answer in culturally relevant ways. I say in the book we need to be addressing the issue of cultural apologetics now, not just classical, not why does God allow evil, what about science, what about reliable scriptures, but what about race, class, sex, gender, ethnicity, and so forth? What about all of that? And so I say that we need to be able to show that Christianity is good for the world. We built the hospitals. Half the names have a saint on them. We built the universities. We're responsible for representative-style government. We adopted twice the ratio of the rest of the general population, and on and on and on it goes. But the new cultural revolutionaries claim that Christianity is not just headless, it's heartless, it's wicked, it's evil, it's oppressive. There are only oppressors and oppressed, victims and victimizers, haves and have-nots. That's Marx. And that has infiltrated the black church, the brown church, the white church, the polka-dotted church, the striped church. It's infiltrated every flora and fauna of America. So our response then is the third revolution. And I address parachurches, pastors, parents and grandparents, professors and educators of all types, philanthropists and donors, political allies, and prayers. All hands on deck. It's the university, stupid. You want to change the culture, change the university. We need to stop putting chlorine downstream. One by one, I addressed parachurch, Ratio Christi. If you don't know about us, I could speak mostly about it because I preside over it. We are different from the other apologetics ministries because we're on the campus, the most influential institution shaping civilization. We're different from other campus ministries because we do apologetics evangelism at the bottom level with undergrads, and we've got a high school division as well. But we also have a prof division, and we have a PhD division now. We learned from the Marxists, the long march through the institutions. I have an agnostic Hollywood movie producer who has given us a lot of money to buy PhD students because he's sick of the woke in Hollywood and figures funding Christian academics might be a bulwark against something worse, to use an expression of Richard Dawkins. And so we now have PhD students that we fund at the highest top 100 schools. We now have Oxford, UCLA, Rutgers, Texas A&M, Baylor, University of Tennessee, Oregon State, Florida State, and we're just getting started. This is a 40 or 50-year project. But you know what? People who say it can't be done. You get people like Rod Dreher. I call him Rod Dreary. I like his writings, but not everyone can move over to Hungary and get dual citizenship. The culture war is over. We have lost it. So what do? Rod Dreher? We go underneath the bunkers and we train our family in our cell groups, and when the radiation hits and kills everybody, I guess we're supposed to come back up and restart civilization. No to that defeatism. D.L. Moody once said, don't polish the brass on a sinking ship. In other words, the Titanic's going down. So what are you going to do? Just get the souls off. We have done harvest crusade after harvest crusade after harvest crusade, and as every person in farming knows, you can't reap a harvest if you don't sow seeds. We abdicated our role and responsibility in high culture. We evacuated out of the universities, and in that vacuum, other people entered in, and now parents and grandparents are literally paying for the apostasy of their own children. You cannot escape this stuff. Well, it can't be done. You know what? The majority got ousted in the first revolution. It can be done. It was, in fact, done. What is actual entails what is possible. And then poor Dawkins now wants to be our friend, and he's saying he's on an apology tour. Can we be your friend? Because he's now ousted. And from the humanities and social sciences, they jump ships into medicine and engineering and mathematics, into the hard sciences, into the NIH, into the journal Nature, and then into the corporate world. And thank God we don't have to look at, male bikinis with a bulge in Target anymore, because now there's a bit of a pendulum swinging and a pushback. We've got a prof ministry, university, college prep, international, and we have a press now. Founder and director of crewpress.org is now the founder and director of RC Press. We've got 50 booklets by the top evangelical authors in all the fields. You hear of intelligent design theory out of Discovery Institute, first intelligible Christian that Joe Rogan had on his podcast in 2,000 episodes, and now he's saying, I think we need Jesus. I really do. I'm serious. Steve Meyer's got 3 500-page books. We said to him, Steve, no one's going to run and read your dumb 500-page books. Smile. Give us those in 25 pages at the 11th grade reading level, and we'll make you famous. Wayne Grudem, no one's going to read your dumb 600-page book. Give us that book in 25 pages, 11th grade reading level. William Lane Craig, no one wants to read your second dissertation of 600 pages on the resurrection evidence. But if you give it to us in 25 pages, 11th grade reading level, we have booklets on all of those topics, history, science, philosophy, and on all the cultural apologetics issues too. Trans, gay, race, economics, all of it. So that people can have help. Pastors can get help. Parents can get help. Enough of the skinny jeans and fog machines in our churches. It's not helping. Pastors and ministers, pastoring is hard. I've done it. You've got a lot of work to do ahead of you. And pastors are dropping out. And their ranks are not being filled like they need to be. It is a hard place right now. But you know what? We've got to move beyond. We've got to encourage the good pastors, and we've got to encourage the bad pastors to become good pastors. From cultural thought leaders and shepherds to faddish gimmicks like skinny jeans and fog machines. We've got to get back to Ephesians 4:11 and 12. We have to not be influenced by sociology and culture, and instead by theology and Scripture. We've got to be able to refute false ideas when they come into our churches. Parents and grandparents, train them up in the way they should go, and when they get older, they get conscripted to work for the other side and become Bart Ehrman. Parents, do not entrust your children to anybody else but you. That's the biblical mandate. Look, in the first century, the apostles were tired. They said, we need this thing called deacons. And so the deacons, for practical reasons, emerged. 2,000 years later, just guessing, you had people that were tired. And you realized now America was de-Christianizing, and there were kids that didn't have Christian parents. And so we came up with this idea of youth pastor. And the Christian parents said, hey, I like that. Can you take my son on Wednesday night too? And then eventually they said, can you just keep him? Give him back when he's 18, right? I've been a youth pastor. I know youth pastors. I know how many goldfish you can swallow on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. That's not preparing for a ratio of 78-1 when you get to Yale. And then sustain the family or abolish the family. Look, parents, for whatever reason, and maybe the economic situation is dire and both parents now usually work. It is hard. You're exhausted when you get home. I get it, right? But they're your children, and if you don't train them right, they are goners once they hit the university. And they don't need to go there either, because the ideas are all over. They all have TikTok. One of the books that I was going to show you tonight, but it's over in my bag. It's by a University of Pennsylvania professor called Abolish the Family. That is a real book. Marx said you can sum up the Communist Manifesto of Socialism by abolishing private property. In critical race theory, it's abolish whiteness. In patriarchy, it's abolish the patriarchy. Abolish the family is part of intrinsic Marxism. They're serious about this. Abolish the family. Philanthropists and donors. Unbelievable story, right here from Chicago. Ken Griffin, 2 years ago, gave Harvard $300 million and $200 million. $500 million. Harvard, that has $52 billion, which is more in its savings account than 50% of the world's nation's entire GDP, each individually. He gave them $500 million. He's a conservative. He was so sick of Chicago and Mayor Lori Lightfoot that he moved from Chicago to Florida, because that's where woke goes to die, apparently, so says DeSantis, right? He left. He's a hedge fund manager. He studies economics to get rich, but he did not bother even opening up the hood and sending out $500 million. Is that how much it's worth to get your name on a brick at these wine and cheese parties? Now he's regretting it, but it's too late. Donors, stop funding those who hate you. One donor in Indiana that I met with recently, she's going to give us $5,000, and I said, okay, thank you for doing that. Please, 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 you told me you're giving money to Northwestern. I've told you who's there. I've told you what they're doing with the money. Please, if you're going to give us $5,000, take it from there. Otherwise, you're giving me $5,000 and them $5,000 to neutralize each other. Stop funding those who hate you. Finally, professors and educators. Lincoln once said that the philosophy in the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Hitler allegedly said, give me the textbooks and I will control Germany. Told you about our RC Press booklets. Prayers, 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 prayers. You think about all the revivals that have happened, going back to Asbury, to Azusa, to Yale, and to Wittenberg. To Martin Luther, to Dr., Professor, University Professor Martin Luther. Most of these revivals are associated with the college campuses. You want to change the culture, change the campus. It is the most worthwhile mission field to invest in. I interviewed Al Mohler for this book, who took over a liberal Southern Baptist seminary, to see that it can be done in an entire institution. Or Alvin Plantinga in philosophy, who in the 60s, when it said God is dead, a new article came out in 2000 when I was switching gears, changing to philosophy. I remember I was at Talbot Biola University, and an article came out from Quentin Smith, an atheist, in the journal Philo or Noose. And it was a wake-up call. Wake up, everybody. God may have been dead in the 60s, but today, perhaps 1/3 of all philosophers writing in philosophy of religion are conservative Christians. He may have been exaggerating there, but there was some truth to that. And that is the most important beachhead. We have established a Normandy. We must reclaim the campuses. Not everybody is called to go back into the campuses, but everybody in this room and some is called to join the revolution. But to join the revolution, you need to know something about your enemy. You need to understand the ideology of the revolution that's taking place right now. So my book, The Progressive Miseducation of America, Confronting the Cultural Revolution from the Classroom and the Community. If you want to go to ratio.link/PMA for Progressive Miseducation of America, You can find all of our booklets there. You can learn more about us. But whatever you do something, do something, do something. We are in a cultural revolution, and we need to have a third revolution. Thank you.